There is something about recovering in the house you grew up in. The same ceiling above the same bed, the curtains your mother hung 30 years ago still on the same rods, the particular smell of that kitchen reaching down the hallway the same way it always did on a winter afternoon. That makes you feel 14 years old and completely safe and completely vulnerable in equal measure, and it was in exactly that softness. 3 weeks after my knee replacement surgery, with prescription bottles on the nightstand and my father's footsteps, coming down the hall in the deliberate way of a man carrying something he has decided to carry, that my family tried to make me sign away my inheritance after surgery. And what none of them understood as they stood in that doorway with the folder already open and the pen already waiting is that they had forgotten one thing, and that one thing was the reason none of them went home that evening with what they came for. My name is Leigh Harmon. I'm 34 years old, and the thing they forgot was the page they left face down. Let me tell you about the land first, because you cannot understand the folder without understanding what it was for. My grandfather Dale Whitaker farmed 43 acres in Hendricks County, Indiana for 31 years. Not a large operation, soybeans and corn, modest yield, the kind of land that does not make a man rich but makes him something steadier than rich, which is rooted. He put in his own drainage tile system in 1987, the summer my mother was pregnant with my brother Mark, because the county had told him it wasn't their problem, and Dale Whitaker had never in his life outsourced a problem he could solve himself. He kept records the way a man keeps records when he believes that accuracy is a form of respect for the land, for the work, for whoever comes after. He updated his property survey in 1999 because the original plat had a minor boundary error that had been on record since 1962, and it bothered him every time he walked the south fence line. The surveyor told him most people didn't bother correcting discrepancies that small. Dale told him most people were leaving a problem for someone else. He paid for the survey himself and filed the corrected description with the county recorder's office and drove home satisfied. That is the man who left me the 43 acres. I work as an escrow officer at a real estate closing firm in Indianapolis. 8 years there, the last 3 handling commercial and agricultural accounts. My job is the closing table, the final moment of a transaction when all the documents are laid out in the order they need to be signed, when every page is accounted for, when every party understands what they are signing before the pen touches the paper. I am the person who explains. I am the person who notices the missing page, the incorrect form, the line that doesn't say what someone believes it says. I have been doing this for 8 years. I have closed hundreds of transactions. I have sat across from people who did not read what was in front of them and have walked them through it with patience, because patience is the instrument the job requires. I know every standard agricultural real estate form in Indiana. I know what a quitclaim deed looks like before I have finished reading the first line of the header. My family chose a recovering surgical patient for their transaction. They did not reconsider that the recovering surgical patient was also me. Dale called me to his kitchen on a Sunday afternoon 3 months before he died. Not my parents, not my brother, me. He poured coffee from the percolator he had used since 1974, and he set it on the table between us, and he told me, without preamble, that the 43 acres were going to me. He said Mark had good hands and understood the land's daily operation. He said my parents had their own finances sorted and the house was theirs. He said he had watched me spend 8 years learning how property moves from one person to another and what that movement means legally, and that he believed I understood the difference between what land is worth on a balance sheet and what it is worth in the longer calculation of time. He did not want the acreage sold the moment an offer came in that looked large enough to be persuasive. He wanted it held by someone who would read the document before signing it. He said, "I know you'll hold it right." He gave me a letter, 2 handwritten pages, his deliberate block print, the same handwriting that had filled 3 decades of farm records and equipment logs and weather journals. He folded them, put them in an envelope, wrote my name on the front. Not a legal document. The reasoning behind the legal document. The full explanation of why, in his own words, so I would have it, when I needed to understand something he would no longer be present to explain. I put the letter in my fireproof file box, the same box that holds my closing certifications, my apartment lease, my car title, the things you do not misplace. Dale died 14 months later. His attorney had done clean work. The will was unambiguous. The transfer was completed correctly through the county recorder's office 4 months after his death. 43 acres in Hendricks County titled to Leigh Harmon, single woman, Indianapolis address. My family received this the way they receive most things that went differently from their expectation, with a surface warmth that sat over something cooler. My mother said Dale had a special relationship with me since I was small. My brother Mark said it made sense, given my work in real estate. My father said nothing, which in Carl Harmon's vocabulary is a specific kind of sentence. Mark had been farming the land under an informal lease arrangement with Dale for 8 years. After the transfer, we continued on the same basis, a quarterly payment from his operation to my account, modest, suited to the land's yield. I did not formalize the arrangement in writing. I know exactly what this tells you about me because I spend my professional life formalizing arrangements in writing. I told myself I would address it when the right moment came. The right moment did not come before the surgery. My parents, Carl and Ruth Harmon, are 61 and 59. My father spent his career as a plant foreman, a man who organizes through arrangement rather than conversation, who arrives in a room with something already decided and presents it as the natural next step. My mother taught first grade for 28 years and manages the emotional weather of our family the way she managed her classrooms, with a warmth that keeps the temperature even and prevents the harder conversations from needing to happen. She is not unkind. She is efficient in the way of someone who has learned that smoothing over is faster than working through. My brother Mark is 37. He knows soil and weather and yield and equipment. He puts genuine labor into the 43 acres, drives the equipment, manages the inputs, makes the daily decisions of a working farm. He has expressed twice in 3 years that the ownership arrangement is inefficient, once at Thanksgiving, once in a phone call the following April. He used the word estate both times. Both times I told him I would think about it. Both times I did not follow up. The surgery was scheduled for early March. Both knees, a compounding injury from years of running that had reached the point of requiring proper resolution. The procedure went exactly as planned. What it left behind was 3 weeks of prescribed recovery, limited mobility, and the practical reality of a first-floor bedroom, which my apartment in Indianapolis did not have, and my parents' guest room in Hendricks County did. 19 days into recovery. Tuesday afternoon, the particular light of a March afternoon coming through the curtains, my mother hung on those rods in 1998. The smell of the kitchen finding its way down the hallway the same way it had found its way since I was a child, watching Saturday cartoons. My medication was on the nightstand, my water glass, my phone, a paperback I had been reading in the slow hours. The ordinary furniture of recovery in a room that still remembered being mine. My father's footsteps came down the hall. I know the specific weight and rhythm of Carl Harmon walking toward a room with something in his hands. 3 decades of living in that sound has made it legible. He came in carrying a manila folder. My mother appeared in the doorway behind him. Mark was visible in the hall beyond her, positioned the way a person positions themselves when they are part of something and have decided to call themselves a bystander. Carl set the folder on the nightstand. He placed a pen on top of it, parallel to the long edge, the way you place a pen when you want the placing to feel like an offering rather than a demand. He said it was paperwork to formalize the land management arrangement. He said an attorney had prepared it. He said it had been sitting unaddressed too long, and this was a good time to handle it with everyone together. 4 words carried the weight of everything. Just sign here, sweetheart. I looked at the folder. I looked at my father's face and my mother in the doorway and my brother slightly behind her. I thought about Dale at a kitchen table In 1999, paying for a survey to correct a boundary error that had been on record since 1962 because he did not leave problems for other people to inherit. I picked up the pen. The room settled. I turned the document over and began reading from the back page forward, because that is where an escrow officer always begins. The back page is the page you are not supposed to look at first. It is the page that tells you what the front page is for. The back page was a standard Indiana quitclaim deed form. I recognized it before I had read the second line. The header format, the spacing, the specific layout that every closing firm in the state uses for the same instrument. I have processed hundreds of them. I know the form the way a pharmacist knows a prescription label. Grantor. Leigh Harmon, a single woman. Grantee. Mark Dale Harmon. Consideration. $1 and other valuable consideration. I read the consideration line twice, not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to be certain of what I had read before I continued reading. $1. In real estate law, a quitclaim deed can transfer any amount of ownership interest for any stated consideration. $1 is the standard nominal figure used when the true purpose of the transfer is not a purchase, but a gift, or a taking dressed as a gift, depending on which side of the document you are on. My grandfather had transferred 43 acres of agricultural land to me through his estate. The document on my nightstand was asking me to transfer those same 43 acres to my brother for $1. I turned to the page before the quitclaim. Exhibit A. In a closing package, Exhibit A is the property description, the legal description of exactly what is being transferred, referenced by the main instrument, so there is no ambiguity about the boundaries of the conveyance. This Exhibit A was not a property description. It was a document summary, one paragraph formatted as an addendum. It referenced a purchase agreement dated February 19th, 6 weeks earlier, 3 weeks before my surgery, between Mark Dale Harmon as seller and a company called Meridian Agricultural Holdings, LLC, as buyer. A purchase agreement signed 6 weeks ago, before my surgery, before the folder. I laid the papers flat on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I looked at my father, who was still standing in the same position he had taken when he set the folder down. Then at my mother in the doorway. Then at Mark, who had shifted slightly in the hallway and was no longer exactly where he had been. A small movement, the kind that happens when a room's energy changes and a body responds before the mind has decided to. I said, "When did Mark sign a purchase agreement with Meridian Agricultural Holdings?" My father said, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I said, "February 19th, according to Exhibit A, 3 weeks before my surgery." Carl said, "It's a conditional agreement. It requires clear title in Mark's name." I want to tell you what those two sentences together mean in the language I speak professionally. A conditional purchase agreement contingent on clear title means the buyer has agreed to purchase the land once the seller can demonstrate they legally own it. Mark had signed a purchase agreement to sell 43 acres he did not own, contingent on obtaining ownership of those acres. The mechanism for obtaining ownership was the quitclaim deed. The mechanism for executing the quitclaim deed was the document on my nightstand. The mechanism for that was finding me in a guest bedroom, 19 days post-surgery, with prescription medication on the nightstand. I had been the contingency. I set the pen on the water glass rather than the folder, and I said, "I need 10 minutes." Carl said there wasn't a rush. There was a rush, as it turned out. There is always a rush when a conditional purchase agreement has a closing deadline, which I was going to confirm in the next 10 minutes by doing what I do in my professional life when I need information from a public record quickly. I picked up my phone. The Hendricks County Recorder's Office has an online property search database. I looked up the parcel identifier I had memorized when the land transferred into my name 4 years ago, because memorizing the parcel identifier on a piece of property you own is the kind of thing an escrow officer does without being asked. The record showed current ownership. Leigh Harmon. Correct. No pending transfers, no liens, no encumbrances beyond the standard agricultural classification. I pulled the parcel value from the county assessor's page, updated annually for tax purposes. The assessed value is typically below market, but it gives you a reference point. The current assessed value was $287,000. 43 acres of Hendricks County agricultural land, assessed at $287,000 for tax purposes. Market value in this county, in the current land climate, typically runs between 1.2 and 1.6 times assessed. I did the arithmetic in the way my hands do arithmetic when they have been doing it long enough, automatically, without asking the rest of me for permission. I searched Meridian Agricultural Holdings, LLC, in the Indiana Secretary of State's Business Registry. Registered in 2019, agricultural land acquisition and development, 3 principals, 18 recorded transactions in Indiana in the past 4 years. The most recent transaction I could find publicly, a 41-acre parcel in Putnam County sold 8 months ago, had transferred at $6,400 per acre. 43 acres at $6,400 per acre. I closed the math and set the phone face down on the bed. My grandfather's land was worth approximately $275,000 on the current market. The document on my nightstand was asking me to transfer it to my brother for $1 so that my brother could complete a sale that had been in negotiation since before my surgery. I called Carolyn Vance at 11 minutes past 3. She has been the senior escrow officer at our firm for 19 years, and she is the person I call when I am looking at something I have already assessed correctly and want to confirm that I have assessed it correctly. Not because I doubt the assessment, because Carolyn has seen more variance of every transaction than I have, and her confirmation has the specific weight of experienced certainty. She answered on the second ring. I told her I was looking at a quitclaim deed, Indiana form, with a $1 consideration and an attached purchase agreement referencing a third-party buyer dated 3 weeks prior to the deed execution, and that I was the grantor on the deed and had not been informed of the purchase agreement before today. Carolyn said, "Who presented it to you?" I said, "My father, in my parents' guest room. I'm recovering from surgery." She was quiet for exactly the amount of time a person needs to understand what they have just been told. She said, "The deed is ineffective without your signature and a notary's stamp. Nothing has transferred. You are currently the titled owner." A pause. "Do not sign anything until you have had this reviewed by an attorney who represents you and not the transaction." I said I understood. She said, "Leigh, a quitclaim for nominal consideration to facilitate a third-party sale presented during a medical recovery with the third-party agreement predating the deed presentation. That is not a family management arrangement. That is a scheme with a paper trail." I said I knew. She said, "Keep the documents, every page." I thanked her. I put the phone on the nightstand beside the medication bottles. Then I called into the room. "Dad?" Carl came in. Ruth followed because Carl, moving into a room, had always carried Ruth behind him. Mark stayed in the hall. I looked at the 3 of them and I laid out what I had found in the 14 minutes since I had turned the document over. Not with heat. I want to be precise about that. With the same flat, sequential voice I use when I'm explaining a discrepancy to a client at the closing table. This document is a quitclaim deed. The consideration is $1. The grantee is Mark. The exhibit references a purchase agreement with Meridian Agricultural Holdings signed February 19th. The land has a current assessed value of $287,000 and a market value I estimated at approximately $275,000 based on comparable sales. I said, "I would like someone to explain to me why an offer from an agricultural development company requires a quitclaim from me to Mark for $1. Ruth said immediately in the smooth voice she used when she was managing the temperature of a room that was getting warm, "There are costs involved. Mark has put years of work into that land. This is about being fair to everyone." Carl said, "The offer came in. It was a good offer. Mark has been the one farming it. Splitting the sale felt right." I said, "Nobody told me there was an offer." Carl said, "We thought it was straightforward." I said, "What was the offer amount?" A pause. the specific pause of a room in which a number has been in the possession of some people and not others, and is about to move. Mark said, from the hall, not entering the room, which told me he had decided not to be in the room for this particular moment. 280,000. The number landed exactly where I expected it. I said, and the deed was asking me to transfer ownership for $1. Nobody answered that directly. My mother said something about how the family had always intended to divide things fairly and that the proceeds of any sale would be discussed together. My father said that was exactly right, that nobody was trying to take anything from anybody, that the conversation about the sale proceeds was going to happen as a family, a conversation about proceeds that was going to happen after I had already signed away ownership. Mark came to the doorway of the guest room at 4:30 that afternoon, not to argue. The argument phase had passed when I had laid the document summary on the nightstand and declined to continue. He stood in the doorframe the way my brother stands when he has something to say that costs him something to say, which is not often because Mark is a man who expresses most things through work rather than language. He said the offer had a 30-day closing window, that the 30 days had started the day he signed the purchase agreement, that 12 of those days had already passed before my surgery. He had 7 days from today. 7 days. That was the deadline they had been working against when my father walked down the hall with the folder. He said the operation, the farm, the equipment, the inputs for the spring planting was running on a line of credit that was coming due in April, that 2 bad growing seasons and a diesel price spike in the previous year had put the operation behind in a way that the sale would resolve, and that another season without resolution might not. He said he had not told me because he had not wanted to put the financial pressure of his operation on a conversation about land that was not his to sell. He said he had thought, and here his voice changed slightly, into the register of a man confronting the gap between what he told himself and what he did. He had thought that if the sale happened quickly, the question of the split could be handled afterward. After I had signed, after the quitclaim had transferred ownership for $1. I looked at my brother. I thought about a man named Dale who drove a surveyor to the south fence line of 43 acres to correct a boundary error that had been there since 1962 because he did not leave problems for other people to inherit. I thought about a letter in a fireproof file box in my Indianapolis apartment, a man's deliberate block print, 2 pages, explaining the reasoning behind a bequest to the granddaughter he trusted to hold it right. He had not said, hold it right unless the situation is inconvenient for someone else. He had not said, hold it right unless the family has decided a different arrangement makes more sense. He had said, you understand what land is worth in the longer calculation. I said, Mark, what the operation needs and what this document would have done are 2 different problems. I'm going to help you figure out the first one. The second one is not happening. He looked at the floor. I said, when you signed a purchase agreement on land you don't own, you created a legal exposure that your attorney should have told you about. That needs to be addressed this week. A pause. I'm going to make a call tomorrow morning. He looked up. I said, not to cancel the deal, to put the right parties on the right documents. The room was quiet. My mother exhaled from somewhere near the doorway. My father, in the hall now, said nothing, which in Leigh Harmon's vocabulary was the closest available form of acknowledgement. The folder was still on the nightstand, all the pages, exactly as they had been presented to me in the order I had laid them after reading, with the pen sitting on the water glass where I had placed it. 7 days. A purchase agreement in my brother's name for land he could not legally sell without my signature, a development company with a closing deadline, and me, in a guest room in my parents' house, 3 weeks post-surgery with a phone and a parcel number I had memorized 4 years ago and a professional knowledge that nobody in that room had accounted for. There was a way through this that did not require a quitclaim for $1. There was a way through that put the right names on the right documents and addressed the farm's operating debt and honored what my grandfather had asked me to hold. There was a way that did not require my silence or my ignorance or my recovery as its primary operating condition. I knew exactly what it was. The The call was going to be the first thing I made in the morning. The call could wait until morning. There was nothing to be done at 7 in the evening that could not be done at 8 in the morning, and I had done what needed doing for today. I had read the documents, laid out the facts in the room, and declined to sign. I should have slept. What I did instead was lie in the guest room in the dark, with my knee at its medicated distance from hurting, and the folder on the nightstand and my phone face up, and run the sequence forward. A professional habit. At the closing table, we call it outcome mapping. You trace the probable path of a transaction from each decision point to understand what you are actually choosing between. Path 1. I call an agricultural property attorney in the morning, address the purchase agreement exposure, restructure the transaction with the correct parties on the correct documents. This path has a 7-day deadline and requires Mark to cooperate and Meridian to be willing to renegotiate with the actual owner, which they may or may not be. Path 2. I sign the quit claim. Mark completes the sale. The proceeds conversation happens, the one my father described as a family discussion, which is the kind of conversation that happens after ownership has already transferred and therefore carries no legal weight whatsoever. I had been mapping path 2 for 11 minutes when my phone lit up. Not a call, a text from Mark. I know it wasn't right. I just need you to understand what's at stake for me. The operation doesn't survive another season without this sale. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to help me. I held the phone and I read it twice. Then I set it on the nightstand and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about a man who spent a summer putting in his own drainage tile because the county said it wasn't their problem. Dale had not said hold it right because he believed the land was more important than the people attached to it. He had said it because he believed I understood the difference between a decision made in the light with full information and a decision extracted in a guest bedroom from someone recovering from surgery with medication on the nightstand. He had put the acreage in my name specifically because he trusted me to know that difference. I could help Mark, and I was going to help Mark, but I was going to do it as the titled owner making a documented decision, not as a grantor on a quitclaim deed processed for $1. I typed back, "I'm making a call in the morning. Don't do anything until I reach you." He read it. He did not reply. I called Patricia Sims at 8:15. She was referred to me by a property attorney I had worked with on a closing 2 years earlier. She practiced agricultural real estate in Danville, and her name had stayed in my phone because I had made a note at the time that she was precise and did not use more words than a situation required. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her the situation in the order it had occurred, beginning with the death of my grandfather and ending with the folder on the nightstand. She asked 4 questions. She did not interrupt while I answered any of them. Then she said, "The quitclaim deed is unsigned and no transfer has occurred. You are the legal owner of record. Mark signed a purchase agreement on property he cannot legally sell, which creates a contractual exposure for him. Meridian's agreement is conditioned on clear title. They do not have clear title from Mark because Mark does not own the property." A pause. "Have you reviewed the Meridian agreement itself?" I told her I had seen the reference to it in Exhibit A, but not the agreement itself. She said, "I need that agreement by end of day. Can you get it from Mark?" I said I could. I called Mark at 8:47. I told him I had an agricultural property attorney reviewing the situation and that I needed the Meridian purchase agreement in full. He was quiet for a moment. Not resistance, something adjacent to relief. The specific quality of a man who has been carrying a structure he built badly and is being offered the chance to set it down. He sent the PDF to my phone within 20 minutes. I forwarded it to Patricia. She called me at 11:43. She said Meridian's purchase agreement was standard acquisition form, conditional on clean title, 30-day close, development intent consistent with their filing history. The agreement named Mark as seller. The contingency was title clarity. She said, "Meridian doesn't care who the seller is as long as the title is clean. Their interest is the land, not the party. What they cannot close with is a quitclaim deed that constitutes a gift transfer predating the sale. That creates a chain of title question they won't accept." I said, "What if I'm the seller?" She said, "Then the title is clean, the sale is direct, and there is no chain issue. I would need to notify Meridian's counsel that the titled owner is substituting as the selling party and that the existing agreement requires amendment." A pause. "This can be done within the 7-day window. I have worked with Meridian's counsel before. They are practical people." I said, "What about Mark's operational debt?" She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she was considering the form the answer should take. She said, "A labor and management settlement agreement. You, as the titled owner, acknowledge Mark's years of operation and document a negotiated portion of the sale proceeds as settlement of that claim. It is legal, it is documentable, and it puts the transaction in the light rather than in a quit-claim deed for nominal consideration." I said, "What is a reasonable figure?" She said, "In comparable situations, 30 to 35% of sale proceeds for a multi-year operational arrangement on agricultural land is defensible. You are receiving quarterly payments during the period, which complicates the upper end of that range. I would put the offer at 30% and document it as a settlement, not a gift." $280,000 sale price. 30% to Mark was $84,000. Call it $85,000 in round numbers, adjusted for the quarterly payments received and the operational relationship documented. That left Leigh Harmon, the titled owner, with $195,000 from the sale of 43 acres her grandfather had transferred to her because he believed she would hold it right. I said, "Make the call to Meridian's counsel." Patricia made the call that afternoon. I was back in the guest room. Not resting, working, the way I work when I'm in the middle of a transaction that has a deadline. Meridian's counsel confirmed within 2 hours that substituting the titled owner as seller was acceptable and that the agreement could be amended that week. He said, and Patricia relayed this to me with the specific dryness she used for details she found illustrative, that he had assumed from the beginning that the titled owner would be the selling party, and that the original agreement had been presented somewhat irregularly. He did not say more than that. He was a professional. Professionals say what the situation requires and not more. I told Carl and Ruth that evening at dinner, not as an announcement, as information delivered plainly, the way my grandfather delivered things that were already decided. I had retained an attorney. I was selling the land as the titled owner. Mark would receive a documented settlement of 30% of proceeds, reflecting his operational role. The sale would close within the week if all parties executed the amended agreement. My father set down his fork. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me with the expression he wore when something had not gone the way he expected, and he was deciding how to position himself in relation to that. He said, "That's more complicated than it needed to be." I said, "The document you brought me was simpler. It was also asking me to sign away my grandfather's land for $1. He said nothing further. That was Carl's acknowledgement, not an apology, not a concession, just the specific silence of a man who has arrived at the end of his argument and has found there is no more road. My mother said eventually that she was glad it was working out. She said it in the voice she used when she meant something and couldn't find the form that said it fully. I took it as what it was. Mark signed the amended purchase agreement on a Thursday. He called me that evening. Not a long call, and not the call I had expected, which was a thank you. It was something more accurate than a thank you. He said, "I knew the whole time it wasn't mine to sell. I told myself the story a different way because I needed it to come out a specific way. I'm sorry I put you in that room." I said, "I know what the operation needed. I'm glad we found a way through it." He said, "Dale was right to leave it to you." I let that sit where he had put it because it was his to say, and it was the truest thing he had said in months, and some sentences are better received quietly than answered. The sale closed in April. Patricia attended the closing on my behalf. I was back in Indianapolis, fully mobile, 6 weeks post-surgery, and I authorized her to execute on my behalf with full power of attorney, which is the correct instrument for that purpose, and which I had signed the prior week in her office after reading every page. Meridian's counsel was there. The transaction closed cleanly. The title transferred correctly. The chain of ownership was documented without a gap or a question. $195,000 net to me. $85,000 to Mark, documented as a labor and management settlement filed correctly, clean on both ends. The farm's operating debt retired. Mark's spring planting funded. The line of credit closed. Patricia sent me the closing summary by email. I forwarded it to my personal file archive and printed a copy for the fireproof file box. I want to tell you about the file box. In the first week of April, a week after I returned to my apartment in Indianapolis, I opened it. Not to look for anything specific, for the reason you open a thing that holds the important documents when a significant event has recently concluded, to confirm that everything was in order, to put my hands on the record. The closing summary went in on top. Below it, in the section I kept for the Hendricks County property, the transfer deed, the assessment records, the tax filings. Below those, in the back of the section, the envelope. Dale's handwriting on the front. My name. The letter he had pressed into my hand on a Sunday afternoon 3 months before he died, because he had something to say, and he wanted it in my possession in his own words. I took it out and read it again. He had written about the land the way he wrote in his farm journals, with precision, no waste, the record of a man who understood that words you wrote down were words you were accountable for. He had written about why he was leaving it to me. He had written about what he hoped I would do with it. Near the end of the second page, in the block print that was slightly larger than his usual because he had been writing for longevity rather than speed, he had written, "Whatever you decide to do with it in the end is your decision to make. I'm not leaving you a rule. I'm leaving you the right to make the decision in the light with full information as the person who holds the title. Hold it right. That doesn't mean hold it forever. It means hold it as yours. Hold it as yours." I had sold the land. That was the decision I made, in the light, with full information, as the person who held the title, after a process that had been clean and documented and correct. The 43 acres were now Meridian Agricultural Holdings to develop as they had intended. My grandfather's name was not on the deed anymore. My name was not on it either. What remained was what my grandfather had actually left me, which was not the acreage. It was the instruction, the understanding of what a document is and what it isn't, the knowledge that some people will set a folder on a nightstand and hope the softness of the room carries the signature across the page before anyone has time to read, the knowledge that the page does not become less true because the room is warm. Dale had left me the ability to read page 2. That was the bequest. The land was just the occasion for it. Patricia sent a note 3 weeks after closing. A professional card, brief. She wrote, "In 22 years of agricultural closings, I have never had a client who had already done more of the work before calling me than you had. It was a pleasure to finish it." I put it in the file box, where the Hendricks County section had been, filed under Resolved. Here is where everyone settled, because you have been with me through all of it and the accounting is the conclusion of the story. Mark retired the operating debt in full the week the settlement funds cleared. He leased a parcel from a neighboring farm in May to replace the acreage and renegotiated his equipment line on better terms with the debt behind him. He texts me occasionally about the season, soil temperature, precipitation, the specific shorthand of a man who communicates primarily through weather. I have started to understand it the way you understand a language when someone cares enough to keep using it around you. Carl has not said he was sorry. Carl will not say he was sorry because Carl processes things through what happens next rather than what happened. What happened next, in Carl's language, was that he drove to my apartment in April with my mother and helped me carry 3 boxes of books up to the second floor because I was still not supposed to be lifting. That was his apology, translated. I received it as the form it came in. Ruth called me on the Sunday after closing and said she was proud of me. She said it quickly, in the small voice underneath the managed one, and then said something about the weather and moved on, because she has always found directness easier to offer in small doses and then retreat from. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too, and that was the whole exchange, and it was enough. Patricia Sims is now on the short list of people I refer to clients who call asking about agricultural property questions outside my firm's specialty. She has not mentioned the referrals, and I have not made it a conversation. Good work returned is its own accounting. Carolyn Vance, when I told her how the transaction had resolved, said, "Of course that's how it resolved." She said it with the specific satisfaction of a woman who has spent 19 years watching the correct outcome follow the correct action and has never once found the sequence surprising. The fireproof file box is in my closet, Clearfield Avenue property section, property tax section, the employment folder, the section that used to hold the Hendricks County records. I do not misplace things I consider important. This has been true since I was 22 and signed a lease without reading the subletting clause. It is more true now. On the nightstand of my Indianapolis apartment, there is no folder and no pen and no medication bottles. There is a lamp, a glass of water, a book, and a phone on its charger. The ordinary furniture of a life that belongs entirely to the person living it. The document they set in front of me asked for my signature at a moment designed to make the signature cost me the least attention. The guest room, the recovery, the medication, the family gathered in the doorway, all of it arranged to make the room soft enough that the page would not get read. My grandfather knew what he was doing when he gave the land to someone who reads page 2. Some people will walk down a hall toward you, carrying something they have already decided, and they will put it on the nightstand and hand you the pen, and they will be counting on the room to do what rooms do when we are tired and trusting and just a little bit home. The room will feel like safety. The document will still say what it says. Turn it over, read it from the back. The back page always tells you what the front page was for. Have you ever trusted someone and later found out they weren't telling you the whole truth? Tell me what happened in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear this. Always ask questions and know the truth before you make a decision. Subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next.